What's going on, guys? Today I'm coming at you with a top 10 Stranger Things episode list. I'm excited to share my favorite episodes with you guys. It is probably my favorite show, and I'm really attached to a lot of these episodes, just like I'm attached to a lot of the characters and a lot of the other things in the show. Funny story, I actually already recorded this the other day, but I had my phone vertical instead of horizontal, so I'm just redoing it tonight, but it's no bother. Anyway, I want to get into my top 10 here. I think number 10 is probably the hardest spot because there's so many honorable mentions like 11 through 17, 18. They could all be eligible for that 10th spot, but I have to pick one that's going to be the final one on the list. And at 10, I'm going to pick season 3, episode 6, E Pluribus Unum. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing that correctly, by the way. But this episode is really, really good. I, of course, like the climactic moments with the monster forming in the hospital and Nancy and Jonathan's lives being in grave danger. It's also moving to see how fear-stricken Hopper and Joyce are when they find out that the Russians are opening the gate again, courtesy of Alexei and Murray's translation skills. But to me, the highlight of this episode is when Eleven is searching for Billy and she ends up getting caught in his mind, and he's like actively responding to her within her spying on him, which has never really happened to her before. It creates a very intense scene in which he basically says they're building a whole army to come defeat you. And of course, Eleven is frightened from this, screaming, crying, once the episode concludes, and it sets up a really good 2 final episodes. I also feel like now that we know what has happened in season 4, Billy acts most similarly to Vecna in this scene in season 3, episode 6, which is also an interesting note. At 9, I have season 4, episode 8, Papa. And I've had to pump the brakes on this episode a little bit because when I first watched it, I thought it might be a top 5 episode of mine, but I've come back down to earth with it and I've realized that there's a lot of episodes I still like better. However, I absolutely love the back and forth exchanges between Eleven and Brenner and how she was finally standing up to him, telling him that he has depicted these monsters all this time, but he is really the monster. He is what has created all this, and he snaps back at her. He somehow has the nerve to tell her that she created all of this. But in a weird way, when he dies, you kind of feel bad for him because I do think he loves her. He just didn't really know how to love, maybe, or didn't know the appropriate steps to take to show someone that you love them and care about them. And I think it's quite obvious that he made a lot of horrible decisions with these kids along the way, and what he did was pretty awful in general. There was, of course, also a very interesting build-up going on back in Hawkins with the crew driving around, getting supplies, and gearing up for this battle with Vecna. I love a couple of the moments Lucas and Max shared. And the last thing we see before episode 9, pulling up with that Separate Ways remix to the Creel house, I thought it was really, really cool and a really cool way to set up for episode 9. At number 8, I have season 2, episode 6, The Spy. This episode is where things really, really pick up in season 2. And if you've watched my other video ranking the seasons, you'll see that season 2 is narrowly my favorite season. I love all the seasons, but picking one, I do pick season 2 as my favorite, contrary to most of the public's opinion, I think. And this episode, along with episode 8 and 9, are the episodes that really sparked my love for this season and for Stranger Things as a whole. I love that this is where Steve and Dustin's relationship really begins, and also where a lot of the crew starts to get back together and converging all at one spot, where these problems are coming about. It's a little weird because this is one of 2 episodes in the entirety of Stranger Things that doesn't have 1 second of Eleven in it, but they certainly make up for that in the next episode when it's all Eleven. I just love how the action builds up in this episode and creates one of my favorite settings that is present in the last 2 episodes of this season. At number 7, I have season 1, episode 8, The Upside Down. This is the finale of season 1, and this is actually the only season 1 episode that made my list. I feel bad for it. And it's not that season 1 is lacking. Season 1 is tremendous as well. I just personally don't find the events that occur in season 1 to be as grand, to be as high stakes. Higher stakes doesn't always necessarily mean better, but I think in Stranger Things, the higher they've gone, the better it has gotten. They've kept the quality at the same level, and the stakes have been higher, which has made higher leverage moments in later seasons better for me. With that being said, I think the conclusion to season 1, especially with the saving of Will and how they carry out that scene, is perfect. Paralleling the situation with Will to Hopper's daughter's death is a very emotional scene. I love seeing that he was the one that was able to bring Will back to life. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to save his daughter. Nobody was in that same way. But he wanted to make sure that this little boy didn't lose his life senselessly and that this mother wouldn't have heartbreak and a hole in her heart for the rest of her life. The mystery of where Eleven goes once she saves the other kids by killing the Demogorgon and disappearing is also cool. The mystery in this season was really good, and it was concluded really well in this finale episode. To round out the bottom five, at number 6, I have season 4, episode 7, The Massacre at Hawkins Lab. Now, this was the final episode in season 4, volume 1, and wow, there was a huge plot twist, the biggest plot twist yet in the show. Of course, we get the Vecna reveal. We see that he is one, and Henry Creel as well as Vecna. So he's really 3 of the characters we've been following along this whole season. And the delivery from Jamie Campbell Bower, I believe, that's who plays 1 and Vecna. His delivery in this monologue that he's giving to Eleven about how he views the world and about how he would like her to join him, it's really menacing and just really freaks you out, honestly. So a great performance by him, a great performance by Eleven and Little Eleven. And it's epic to get all this background and see how Eleven defeated him while at the same time creating this universe unintentionally. And of course, creating this monster. Knowing the history of Vecna is really what makes it the strongest monster in the show. And we got a lot of that history, a lot of that background, and got to see what makes Vecna tick in this episode, which was really important. There were also some cool moments between characters back in Hawkins, seeing how they were navigating through the Upside Down after Steve got caught in there the episode prior. And Nancy, of course, fell into Vecna's trance while trying to go back to the right side up, I guess you could call it, the real world. All right, now to enter the top 5. At number 5, I have season 4, episode 9, The Piggyback, which is the season 4 finale. They really went for it all in this season finale, and I really appreciate everything they did. I will say, I think it slightly fell short of my expectations, slightly, and that is the reason I can't put it any higher. One of the main things I was expecting in this season finale was an epic battle between Eleven and Vecna, and we get a little bit of that, but it wasn't as long, it wasn't as back and forth as I expected, and I'm sure they're saving some of that stuff for season 5, which is okay, but it just didn't live up to what I was expecting. There's also the controversy surrounding Max's death, or now we know fake death, and for me personally, I'm not super bothered by it, but I will say it was an interesting creative choice. I'm not sure if I would have done the same. I love Max. She was the best character in season 4 for me, and I'm glad she's going to continue to be in the show, but I don't know that it was the correct decision. That scene was, I think, the best scene in the history of the show, and some people say it's ruined by bringing her back to life, and it takes away from the emotion that Kayla MacLachlan and Sadie Sink just poured into that performance in her death scene. For me, I'm okay with it. I like that, they brought Eleven's emotion into it and she was, saving her friend with a power that she had never really used before. Or should I say, a use of her power that she's never done before. But I understand why people would have a problem with it. And I agree that it could take away from it a little bit, but that is still probably my favorite scene in the history of the show, or at least top 5. And there was a lot of mayhem, but I guess a lot of it may have seemed like it was a little bit inconsequential. But I definitely think the death scenes of Eddie and kind of the death scene of Max were super, super high points in this episode. And I just love seeing all these characters go through battle in this episode. The stakes were really high, and I think they all delivered. And even though the episode was so long, I feel like we still didn't get quite enough. I'm giving a lot of criticism here. All in all, it was an entertaining episode. A lot of cool stuff happened. Mike finally said, "I love you." The back and forth as far as the communication between Eleven and Vecna was super interesting. And I like that they ended the season on a negative note for once. Season 1, season 2, season 3, either Eleven is saving them or they're being saved somehow. And even though some bad stuff happened, the season is ending all in all on a positive, hopeful note. But this time, their world is being overtaken by the Upside Down. They know Vecna is still alive and brewing a plan to try to take over the world and really kill all of them. So it certainly ends on a much more negative note. And I think that is the best decision they could have made, something that was really necessary for a change of pace from the other season endings. Sorry that explanation for that episode was so long. I just felt the need to explain why I didn't think that epic episode should have been any higher than 5. At number 4, I have season 2, episode 8, The Mind Flayer. This is the second to last episode in season 2, and man, I mean, this episode and the one that follows are really just what I think of when I think of Stranger Things, and they're the reason that season 2 is my favorite season. I love that the whole crew is together trying to prepare for this fight, trying to help Will get out of this trance and get information that will help them defeat this monster. Ultimately, the plan goes awry. He hears the telephone ring in the house, and the Demodogs are out to get them. Luckily, with perfect timing, in classic Stranger Things form, Eleven comes back to save the day, and her re-entrance into the scene, coming into the house, is such a legendary moment, one that I'll never forget viewing for the first time. And as her and Mike lock eyes, it's just such a great moment, such a heartwarming moment, and I'm so happy for them. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Bob's death. Bob, like so many of these other one-season characters, was so good and a character that you could really get attached to very quickly. A very fun-loving guy that really never questioned anything too much, just really tried to give his best effort to help the group. And you have to appreciate his energy and what he did for Joyce and Will and in his efforts to save them. I also just think at this point in season 2, so many of these characters were at their peak. This leads me into my number 3 episode, season 2, episode 9, The Gate. This is certainly my favorite episode from the first 2 seasons, and wow, I mean, just so much goes on. Once again, everybody is still together, or pretty much together. They're more so together in episode 8, actually, and then there's some necessary splitting up that needs to happen in episode 9 for everybody to get their jobs done, to get the particles out of Will. Eleven and Hopper go to close the gate. The rest of the crew goes to distract the Demodogs so that Eleven can get her job done. But once again, they're all in close vicinity working together, and it just feels like the most Stranger Things that Stranger Things has ever felt. It feels like home for Stranger Things. I absolutely love the car ride. I love the introspection from Hopper, him letting everything out to Eleven, a little bit snappy with her, and he gets so frustrated when she breaks the rules or she tries to go see people because he's scared that he's going to lose her like he lost his other daughter. And at this point, you can tell just how much they mean to each other and how much they love each other, and that this isn't going to be a temporary situation. They're really going to become a long-lasting father and daughter. Also, the visuals of Eleven closing the gate are epic and some of my favorite in the history of the show, and it's just such a cool moment. I mean, what's not to like? The main character in the show with these crazy superpowers we've never seen before, closing the gate of this evil monster, his head trying to poke out, but she digs down deep like 8 told her to, and she finds things that frustrate her to close this gate, and she gets the job done, closes the gate without a doubt, and props to Eleven. Also, real quick, got to mention the snowball dance at the end. All of my favorite characters taking W's. Dustin, even though he got turned down at first, Nancy takes a W, coming over to dance with Dustin and telling him that the girls will wise up in a couple years and not to worry about it. So they had a nice moment together. Will even gets asked to dance, even though the girl calls him Zombie Boy, which I didn't really care for. Lucas, even though his tactics weren't perfect, was able to get Max out on the dance floor, and they even kissed. And much to the audience and Mike's surprise, Eleven does show up to the dance. They're able to dance together. Mike says she's beautiful. They kiss, and they have the moment that they've been waiting to have for so long. After Mike thought she was gone all this time, it's just such a precious moment. So I love this season 2. I love how it closes out with the last 2 episodes, and I was close to moving them further up, but these top 2 episodes just have super, super great scenes that I couldn't move them down any further. At number 2 is season 3, episode 8, the finale of season 3, The Battle at Starcourt. What a grand finale this was, all coming to a head when the Mind Flayer chases them down to the Starcourt Mall, where all of these plot points once again are kind of converging. And much thanks to my boy Lucas, the GOAT, they have a plan to hold off the monster because Eleven's powers aren't working, which I loved that creative decision to finally, bring up an issue with her powers. I think it's been the easy way out all these seasons. She saves them, she saves them, she saves them all throughout this season. But now her powers are gone. Something else has to happen. But my boy Lucas came through with the plan once again, and they staved off the Mind Flayer for a long time with these fireworks. as Hopper, Murray, and Joyce were doing their work down below in the Russian tunnels, trying to turn off this machine that is keeping the gate open and keeping this monster and all the other particles and stuff alive. There's just so many good moments in this episode. I love how Eleven saves herself by finding the humanity that's left within Billy, even though he's controlled by the Mind Flayer. She remembers the flashbacks that happened when she was within his head, and she's able to bring that out of him, and he sacrifices himself for her. I love the moment with Dustin and Susie. We finally get the Susie reveal. We know that she is real now, and they sing the never-ending story to get Planck's constant. It was a little ridiculous that she wouldn't just give it to him and wouldn't believe that he's actually saving the world, because why wouldn't my man Dustin be saving the world? But nevertheless, they get Planck's constant. They have a really funny, cute moment together. And from there on out, we know what happens with Hopper. Joyce and him lock eyes after he defeats a guy in a fight, but Joyce knows she has to turn the keys to get this machine off as quick as possible, because he's not going to be able to get out of that room with all those electric volts going around. And also, every second is precious that this Mind Flayer continues to be around these kids and threatening their lives. So she turns the key, and it appears that Hopper dies. And in the following scenes to close out the season, Eleven reads Hopper's letter. And this is probably my favorite emotional scene in the history of the show. The song Heroes plays, which is one of the best songs in the history of the Stranger Things soundtracks. And we get a peek into what Hopper was really feeling, because obviously he's this tough, blunt character, rigid on the outside, but we all know that he has a huge heart. And apparently at some point when he was uncomfortable with what was going on between Eleven and Mike, he actually did decide to sit down and write his feelings. And it basically just talked about how he feared change and he didn't want to lose her to the world, and he was afraid of her growing up and not needing him anymore. It seemed like he really loved the experience of having a daughter again, having somebody that relied on him, and just the fact that that was approaching a lot of change was upsetting him. Season 3 got off to a little bit of a shaky start for me as far as the actual plot line. I still loved all the characters, but the last 3 episodes and this season finale was killer. I loved how it kind of recovered in my eyes, and wow, there's just so much going on, and it was a great finale. Hopper's death was emotional, and man, that fleeting scene where Eleven's reading the note, they're driving away, it's kind of a mix of very devastating yet hopeful, because Hopper just had such a way with words in that letter. It was spectacular. But at number 1 as my favorite episode in Stranger Things through 4 seasons is Season 4, Episode 4, Dear Billy. Now, maybe this is some recency bias. Maybe if I give this another year to settle, this won't be my favorite. And I wouldn't have even expected to have a non-finale episode as my favorite episode in this. But I really just think the running up that hill scene is that good that it can push this episode over the top. And this episode, even before that scene, kind of started to feel like a turning point for the season. And it got this really high-scale season turning in the right direction, because the first 3 episodes were a little iffy and or a little slow and confusing at points. And man, I mean, Max, my favorite character in Season 4, really just killed it. The visuals in the Upside Down and Vecna's lair were so unique and cool, and I just loved how they played with emotion, with flashbacks and her state of depression, kind of playing with all that and putting it all into the scene as she sees this gate where she can run to her friends and run away from her problems, accept them into her life, so that she can heal. And as Nancy and Robin get this information, this life-saving information about how music can touch an area of the mind that nothing else can, it's really cool to see how it all connects. And I just love this. I was awestruck when I first watched it. And I feel like I didn't really understand how much I actually love this scene and love this episode until I watched it 2 or 3 times. I definitely think this scene with her running away from Vecna and Vecna kind of wanting to get his vengeance on her and the crew the rest of the season, because he doesn't think people should be able to outsmart him like that. I think it is the best and my favorite moment in Stranger Things up to this point. I just really love this episode, really love that scene. And I think it all came together at the right time for this episode. So those are my top 10 episodes in Stranger Things. Thank you for watching if you watched all this. I know it's a lot of talking, but I have some very strong opinions on my favorite show. If you enjoyed, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I'll have more Stranger Things content and content on other shows coming very soon. So stay tuned. I appreciate the support, and I will see you later.